Hello and welcome to the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I'm your host and beat reporter, and I've been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for On SI every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to march forward through another training camp together. As always, you can always find our 100% free, 24/7 boots on the ground coverage of the Jacksonville Jaguars every single day when you follow us on social media such as Facebook and Twitter at Jaguars on SI. You can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. All right, folks, welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. Today we are going to talk about Day 3 of Jacksonville Jaguars training camp, which took place Friday at the Miller Electric Center right here in Jacksonville, right next to Everbank Stadium. It was the first day that I was out there for training camp this year. Unfortunately, had to miss the first 2 days. First days of training camp, I believe I've missed since I've started covering the team. It was kind of a tough pill to swallow, but the great Jacksonville Jaguars on SI team delivered you guys fantastic coverage all the way. And then we were there live, boots on the ground on Friday. So essentially, my major takeaway from the practice was that this looked like a much different, I guess you could say, early training camp phase practice than maybe any other Jaguars practice I've seen before. Now, the first week of training camp, it really just feels like a carryover of the offseason program. They've been in shorts and t-shirts for so long. And after a couple days, you can tell they're kind of chomping at the bit to get in pads because as much as they're doing 7-on-7 and team drills and even run fits, etc., it's not football, really, until you get the pads on. And for the Jaguars on Friday, that was one of the most spirited and, frankly, physical early training camp practices I've seen while covering the team, if not the most. And I don't have a point of reference to the first 2 days to use it for, but it was certainly the biggest observation I had from the day. These guys were getting after it, not just, defensively, but offensively. There were guys flying around. I thought the defense had a fantastic energy, really from the early start of practice. You could see that they made a couple plays to kick off practice that I think kind of gave them momentum. And the reason I don't post training camp stats or anything like that is because so many times we don't know the context of what these teams are trying to accomplish in each period, each drill, etc., what's scripted, all those kind of things. We just don't know. So I don't try to read way too much into, results, from that perspective. But you could tell early on that the defense kind of had an edge to it. They were making plays flying downhill. Both Foye Oluokun and Caleb Branshaw made would-be tackle for losses on screen plays. Caleb Branshaw drew some, serious praise from those on the field, after that play. And it just kind of carried on, from there. One consistent theme that we saw over the course of the offseason that I saw translated to Wednesday was that the Jaguars' top two cornerbacks, Tyson Campbell and Jordan Lewis, are really gaining some momentum. The Jaguars tried to get the ball into Brian Thomas's hands, and there was a lot of red zone work. I'd say probably 60 to 70% of the day was red zone, whether that's team or 7-on-7, etc. And the Jaguars tried to get the ball to Brian Thomas Jr. Trevor Lawrence tried to get the ball to Brian Thomas Jr. a good bit. There weren't many completions. There were a couple. There were. I believe there was a touchdown and 7-on-7 or a near touchdown, something along those lines. But you could tell it was a frustrating day for the Jaguars' alpha male receiver. And to me, it wasn't because the balls were just being put in impossible places. To me, it wasn't, even Brian Thomas Jr. is just flat out, what are you doing, dropping passes, etc., stuff like that. To me, it was because of the defense. Tyson Campbell and Jordan Lewis both made some great plays on BTJ. Jarian Jones made one in the back of the end zone as well. They made it a tough and frustrating day for Brian Thomas Jr. on Friday. And that is one thing, again, that I think has carried over from the offseason is the play of Tyson Campbell and Jordan Lewis in practice. Obviously, you want to wait and see until pads get on. But, Jordan Lewis had another fantastic play in coverage in red zone drills against De'Ami Brown to break up a pass from Trevor Lawrence where it looked like it was going to be a completion of De'Ami Brown near the 1 yard line, maybe. And Jordan Lewis just makes a fantastic leaping pass deflection. You wouldn't believe that he's one of the older players on the roster, looking at how he practices. He's a fiery guy, and he's gotten his hands on a lot of footballs. And Tyson Campbell, I'd say, from the start of the offseason to the one training camp practice I've seen so far, probably the most dominant down-the-down guy the Jaguars have had out there on the practice field. Now, I will say, the defense, some other positives. Chad Muma had an interception that came off a deflection at the line. Liam Cohen was pretty clear at the practice that they're getting a little bit too many deflections at the line right now. You saw it happen. And, Muma, there was nobody within 15 yards of him. The ball went right to him. It was one of those plays where you're like, okay, if that wasn't a deflection, that is an incredibly worrisome play. Other than that, I thought you saw them get some good pressure. I thought DeJuan Smoot had an impressive day. And again, they aren't in pads, so it's really hard to judge the trench guys, but they were still getting after it a little bit. And DeJuan Smoot had several pressures, knocked the ball out of Nick Mullins' hand on one play. Mullins was able to recover it, but I thought Smoot was very active. I thought Devon Hamilton was very active. I saw him beat Ezra Cleveland for a would-be sack on one play. He was another guy who was disruptive. They were very thin, I'd say, though, defensive tackle-wise. Mason Smith, obviously, is on the PUP list, didn't practice. You have Eric Armstead, who he goes through individual drills, but, he didn't go through any snaps in the team drill period. Liam Cohen said it's more of him having kind of a veteran workload, one of the older guys on the roster, etc., has battled injuries in the past. So, probably just being smart, I wouldn't say overly, but just being, a little precautious with him, which is perfectly understandable. But you could tell that, light on defense tackle. And Devon Hamilton was a guy who absolutely stepped up, and he had a good day. Now, on the offensive side, I thought Trevor Lawrence had an okay day. I thought that he made, honestly, one of the best throws in a training camp that I've seen him make, in a touchdown to Parker Washington in the back of the end zone. Caleb Bransall was right there. Jordan Lewis was right there. I don't know how he fit it through that window, and it was a great sliding catch by Parker Washington as well. It was really, an S-tier throw. It was one of those throws where you look at Trevor and you're like, yeah, that's a franchise quarterback. Now, there were some other throws, not counting any of the tips or anything like that, but, he had a couple thrown into some crowded spots. But I thought overall, an okay to solid day. With how it was red zone and not much pushing the ball downfield, a lot of short passes, a lot of checkdowns, etc. But I did think he had some, impressive plays in the red zone compared to the rest of his practice. Now, Parker Washington, him and Eli Pinkall, really stood out. Several touchdowns by both of them, during drills. Parker Washington made the one. Then he had another on a, scramble drill. Trevor Lawrence was able to break out the pocket, extend the play, and Parker Washington was, manned up with Jordan Lewis, was able to find some room, and ultimately, found the end zone. And Eli Pinkall made, a really impressive sliding catch from Nick Mullins in the corner of the end zone. Nick Mullins, I thought, had, frankly, an impressive practice as well. He's kind of separated himself, as you would expect. He was clearly signed to be the backup quarterback, but he has separated himself from kind of the rest of the quarterback depth that they have behind Trevor Lawrence. What I think you're going to want to, look for moving forward, I think obviously when the pads come on, the offensive line has to be the primary focus.